Hey guys, this is Jerry Brewer of East Bay Hitting Instruction, and today I want to talk about the topic of getting into the rear hip, and we're going to also look and see what's going on with the rear knee. And so this topic is come about from basically what we're doing pre-stride and transitioning into the stride. So if you follow me on Twitter last weekend, I asked Josh Donaldson, what's he thinking about this movement? What's he thinking about as he starts to swing, as he's transitioning from pre-stride, getting into the stride? And his response was something really, really good. He said he is getting the weight into the rear hip, and he didn't say shifting his weight back or going back before he's going forward or getting it over the rear leg. He said he's getting into this rear hip, and I think that's a really, really good thought. And I want to look at this and explore this thought of how he's doing this and why this is important. And so let's watch him do this one more time. You can see he's kind of pressing his knee in a little bit. There's the knee press, and then he's getting into this rear hip and pushing himself forward through his rear hip into the stride. So let's look at a few other guys. Let's look at Jose Bautista and Chase Utley. And I'm pointing out guys here that have a lot of this knee pinch in. If you're familiar with kinesiology, basically these guys have their thigh bone or their femur internally rotated. And so if you're familiar with this isn't a great position. You're not in a strong position to kind of drive or generate a lot of power. And so we're going to look at why they're doing this and what they're doing with their stride. Let's look at a couple more guys here. Bryce Harper and Albert Pujols, same thing. You see this medially rotated rear leg rather. And so what's going on? Why are they doing this? Certainly not everyone does this, but I'm just pointing out these guys for demonstration. So let's take a look at their swings. Let's go to Harper, and let's go to Pujols. So here we have Harper on the left, and we see as he starts his swing, he's going to immediately come out of that. And so I'm pointing this out because sometimes we see guys who will put wedges under your rear foot, or you put a boozle ball or what have you, and to kind of prevent this knee from going this way, to kind of keep driving this in. And we see that this is not what hitters do. Bryce Harper, he basically comes out of this internal rotation and gets into his rear hip. He's basically putting that femur into that hip socket and pushing through it. In an internally rotated position, the femur is trying to pull out of the hip, towards the front, and so he is pushing that thigh bone into the hip, quite literally, to control his stride. You can see he didn't shift his weight back at all. There's no going backwards. It's all just getting into that hip. We can see the same thing with Albert Pujols. He's going to come out of this internally rotated position and push that thigh bone into that rear hip, and that's going to control his stride. Again, not a lot of rear movement. Some guys do, some guys don't, but he's coming out of this position and pushing that thigh. So if he had a ball back here or a wedge, he would have a much harder time doing that. If you're forcing your knee in, he's not going to be able to get that good movement of getting into that rear hip. Let's take a look at Jose Bautista. If I can click the right file. And Chase Utley. Hang with me here. Okay, so here's Bautista in this pinched off, internally rotated position. And what's the first thing he's going to do? Come out of it. And then get into that rear hip to control his stride. Very, very strong movement. Chase Utley, same thing. You see him pressing that rear knee in, and then finally pressing it in, reversing it, getting into this good position. So what are these guys doing? Why are we starting with this pinched in knee? Why are we internally rotating this knee? What's going on? They're just coming out of it. Why don't we just start in this position of into the hip? Why don't we just put our thigh bone into the hip and just have it ready to go? And for that, I'm going to pull up one of my favorite analogies for comparing the swing to, is basically a high jump, or in this case, a broad jump. This is Jamie Collins at the NFL Combine. And what we're going to see is right here, he's in relatively weak position, standing straight up, hands over his head. You can almost see he's sticking his gut out. He's kind of in a lot of lordotic position. And so he's going to go from this position of weakness to a position of strength. and then he's going to move. Okay, one more time. Position of weakness, position of strength, and move. But he doesn't camp out in that bottom position. You know, we don't squat down and just hold it forever. We don't just start here and just chill, because we wouldn't be able to come out of this very powerfully. If you're familiar with like the stretch shortening cycle or elastic behavior of muscle. So we don't want to do that. We want to get in this position dynamically, and that's what these guys are doing. If we can go back to Bryce Harper, you know, he's in a position at start where he's not into this hip. You know, he's pushing it out of his hip. If you think about it, he's pushing this knee in, and he's getting prepared in a pretty weak position and telling himself, okay, I'm in a weak position, let's get into a strong position, save that range of motion now, and now I can act. Pretty good. See the same thing with pull holes. Weak position, strong position, save that range of motion, and now we're going to have that knee going in as he's driving through the rear hip. Okay, so I want to show Donaldson one more time. So the point of this is get the ball, get the wedge out from your rear hip or from your rear foot. Learn how to get into your rear hip. It's more about just weight shift. It's really learning to control your stride, you know, through that rear hip. Very, very important. A lot of guys like to do this where they're not into the rear hip and they're actively thinking about getting into it right there. Go from a position of weakness to a position of strength. Weak to strong to explode. Alright guys, so think about that in your stride. Don't give up that range of motion. Don't give up your rear hip too early, and use it to drive your swing. Videos are courtesy of MLB Advanced Media, used under the Fair Use Act. Alright guys, take care. Get into that rear hip.